Well, I have been listening to the science debate, and it's been really interesting for me because, you know, I tuned into this topic when I was at EPA in the Clinton administration and was involved with the original setting of the PM2.5 standard and checked out for quite a long time. And now, obviously, I'm back here at ARB responsible for implementing our program. So I have appreciated how much work has gone on since those early days and how much of the controversy that swirled around the whole issue of moving from a focus on all particles to smaller particles has now, you know, moved on to a much more sophisticated kind of discussion. There are about 6 questions here that are really policy questions, and they probably reflect a lot more of what people who have been here. I think some of them had to leave, but I know there were a number of people in the audience who are here because they are involved with some of the industries that are being regulated, especially trucking, construction, and so forth. And so their questions are they tend to be pretty practical about, you know, why are you doing this, and, you know, what's your excuse, basically. So I just wanted to take a step back for a second and say how I think we're approaching the issue of regulating PM2.5 and how we think about these questions at the Air Resources Board, which is a policy agency. So first of all, the Air Resources Board is the agency created under state law to do basically 2 major things. One is to come up with the plans and develop the regulations to meet federal air quality standards or any state ambient air quality standards that we create. And the other one is to deal with reducing exposures to toxic air contaminants. I want to tell you that having had this job, the same job I'm in right now, you know, 30 years ago, the levels of public concern about air pollution wax and wane, mostly in regard to economic conditions more than they have anything to do with the measured air pollution. The comment about how people ought to realize that we've really done a lot to clean up the air, it's interesting to me because I know we've cleaned up the air. I've lived through a lot of that experience, and there's no question that we measure many pollutants at far lower levels than we did when I moved out here in 1970. On the other hand, public concern, especially in some communities, has not gone away about air pollution. People, even those who lived through the period when it was much worse than it is now, still feel that air pollution is unacceptable. They're worried about different things. They might be worried more about toxic chemicals than they are about ozone, but there's still the pressure to continue the work of cleaning up the air is strong. Okay, so with respect to PM2.5 and what we're doing with that, one of the things that I think has created a lot of concern, and understandably so, is that the very controversial report that came out with the information that suggested higher risk of mortality and premature death from being exposed to PM2.5 came out shortly before the ARB adopted some regulations, or while we were in the process of adopting some regulations dealing with particulate emissions from diesel engines. And those 2 things are sort of related, but in some ways they're not related, because the truck rules and the off-road diesel equipment rules that the ARB has adopted and is implementing were adopted under the state implementation plan that we have to submit to U.S. EPA for meeting the federal fine particle standard. We are not at liberty to decide that we don't think PM2.5 is a problem. We have to submit a plan on pain of being sued and losing our highway funds and so forth if we don't show how we're going to meet that federal ambient air quality standard. And the plans that the state had developed over the years, particularly for the South Coast Air Basin and for the whole Central Valley, seemed to show that we had done just about everything we could do to clean up stationary sources, all the power plants and refineries and canneries and everything else. Everybody had controls on, and so you're going to have to kind of go by logical steps. We clean up fuels, and the next step was to go look at diesel equipment. And they have been the last group to be regulated, and there's a good reason for that. It's important economically. It's characterized by a lot of small businesses, so it's it's much more difficult and expensive to regulate in that area. But the time finally came to adopt those regulations. Now, do we consider effects of the economy, or do we consider the economy? Yes, I've already said that, cost effectiveness in terms of regulation is a key issue for ARB. We look at cost effectiveness relative to other things that we could control. So, every time we go about doing a rulemaking, we try to look at it in comparison with the cost of other rules that we've already adopted, and not to just jump into things that are way more expensive. We also look at the fact that the economy can change and sources can change in terms of their contribution to the problem. So for the diesel-related industries, both construction and trucking, the current economic downturn has made a big difference in the inventory. We know that. And so we are both slowing down in terms of enforcement of rules, and we are actually looking at reviewing those rules to see what can be done or what needs to be done to continue the progress that we're making on meeting air quality standards, but to do it in a way that doesn't over-regulate or cost more than it has to. I guess the last issue is about the toxic aspects of diesel particulates specifically, which I realize is the main concern of some of the people who are here, is whether the toxicity or the identification of diesel particulate as a toxic air contaminant was correct when it was first done, or whether it should be re-looked at again in terms of current information. And I guess that process is not under the control of ARB. It's something that we take, we receive our information on that through the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. But my view would be that we should regularly look at and update, all of our toxic assessments. If we have, new bodies of evidence out there, it would be wrong not to do that. Science moves on, and particularly relative information about what's important and what isn't. So I think that actually answers the major questions. There was one question where somebody asked why we had so many industry representatives who were here to manufacture doubt. And I would just say to that, I don't think of anybody as either an industry representative or an environmental representative here. I know that people have disclosed that their salaries or their research is funded by different groups. I think that's a fact that can be noted, but I guess I believe that science is science, and the great thing about a symposium like this is that it really does allow people to expose each other's ideas, challenge each other's positions, and I think people have done that very effectively. So I think that covers what I was assigned.
Good. Thank you, Mary.